Welcome back to the AlmighTees channel. And this week's episode is part 2 of the multi-part series, My Journey into and Through the Screen Printing Industry. Consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any of the story. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be alerted whenever we upload a new video. So stick around, we're going to talk about that next. Before we start, if you haven't seen part 1, I'll link that video in the description, and I recommend that you go watch that one first. That will help you better understand this video. April 1989 was the month and year that I entered into the screen printing industry. I started working for a company called ScreenTex, and they were a contract screen printing company in my hometown of Lugoff, South Carolina. So when I went in for my interview, it was by the part owner manager, a guy by the name of Bill, and he had recognized me from my resume and from when I had been in that vocational tech class that I attended in high school. He was there back then because they were actually looking for somebody that was interested in not going to college, but that may want to further their career in computer graphics with that company. And now here I am accepting that position, and I actually got my start in the screen printing industry in the art department. I'd known that it was a company that printed some kind of apparel, t-shirts, or some kind of wearable, but I'd really no concept of what screen printing really was. I do remember in my mind's eye thinking, was it like some kind of a machine that you put the shirt in and then the machine put the image onto the shirt, which if you think about it now, that kind of sounds like direct to garment, doesn't it? At that particular time, the art department had a very early version of the Apple Macintosh. We had an Apple LaserWriter printer. We had a light table that had a pin system. We used acetate, used a stat camera, ruby litho, amber litho, repeatograph pens, India ink, and we had the flat file cabinets so that when we were done burning the screens, we could file the art away in these flat, really big, flat filing cabinets. Maybe for some of you old timers, you'll remember that we used to use the peripherals, so in anything that was hooked to the computer, like a scanner or a printer, some of you will remember the SCSI chain, and it was basically a way of connecting all of the different peripherals of the computer system to the system using one chain. Back at this time, there weren't inkjet printers, so what we had to do was print the separations that we created in Adobe Illustrator, print them out on the laser printer on 8.5 by 11 sheets of regular copy paper, and then shoot them on a stat camera, and that stat camera is what created our separations or our transparencies. So for starters, we would shoot our key line with the stat camera to get our base transparency, tape that down on the light table, and then take our sheets of ruby litho with our X-Acto blades and cut out the different colors on each individual sheet of ruby litho, kind of like the way we print separations out on an inkjet printer today. As I spoke of earlier, our light table had a pin system on it, so we would take these tabs, put the tabs on these bigger sheets of acetate, and then we would find our center line, find out where the design needed to fall on that acetate, tape it to that sheet, the key line, and then take each subsequent color and tape it to another piece of acetate on those same pins, on those tabs, and those same separations. Once they were completed, we were able to take them into the screen room, and there was another set of pins on the screen table, and that's how they transferred the separations from the art department to the screen department to the screen table to the screen for exposure. Working at ScreenTex, there were a lot of firsts, and there were a lot of times since I've been in the industry that there were some things that I saw and did and equipment that I worked on that I've never seen again in the industry. Usually exposure units are more vertical where the light source is at the bottom and it shines up to where you have your screen on the exposure unit. This one was a little bit different. It was a wall hung exposure unit with a big table, and you pull it down and it would go from vertical to horizontal. You'd unlock it and it had the rubber, not belt, but the rubber blanket on top of it, but it was horizontal. So it was actually vertical or perpendicular with the wall. And then the exposure, the light source, which I'm assuming was metal halide, thinking it was metal halide. And it was actually so that the exposure unit back then was not up and down, but horizontal. Never worked at another screen printing shop since that had one of those types of exposure units. As I had said before, ScreenTex was a contract screen printing company, primarily printing cut parts. We didn't do a whole lot of t-shirts. Every once in a while we would, but it was mostly children's cut parts, meaning it was the front of the shirt, no sleeves or back or any of the cuffs or anything. It was just the front of the shirt, and we did a lot of crystalline, we did a lot of puff, we did a lot of glitter. It was actually a nightmare to work and to finagle doing the inks, the screens, and the artwork for that kind of printing, because it was all, well, not all, but it was mostly fleece. And for those of us in the screen printing industry, we know what it's like to print on fleece. Flashing, it was tough. It was bad. One of the other things that we did at ScreenTex that I never did at any of the other screen printing companies I've worked for, we literally had an ink room, and the ink room was nothing but bases and pigments. And there was no recipes for any of the colors. It was all doing it by eye. So I kind of got my feet wet, and I struggled for many years at trying to match ink color using that process, because I never really was taught or had a basic understanding of using primary colors to adjust and or to create custom colors straight, out of the bucket. When I started at ScreenTex, one of the other things that I've never seen in the screen printing industry since is the precision oval hydraulic screen printing press. The precision oval that we had at ScreenTex was an 8-color press, and that was the only press that we had when I started. Now later, they ended up upgrading and added I guess it was an 8-color MHM, and then eventually, for whatever reason, wasn't happy with that press, and they sold it off and ended up getting a 6-color precision oval. So there was an 8-color, a 6-color, and they had a gas dryer. There was a time at ScreenTex, later in my time there, they landed a contract to print the grips on the bottom of socks. And we used a lot of puff for those grips. And one of the real neat things that I think that we did then was the company that we had obtained to print the socks had the rights to print the Simpsons. So we were doing a lot of Simpson socks back in the day. And Bill at that time came up with an ingenious way to print, I believe it was 10 socks at a time using that precision oval. And there was a bunch of them. Boxes and boxes and boxes of those grip socks with the puff on the bottom. The company that we had printed all of that fleece and all of those children's cut parts was a company by the name of Stepping Stones. Another customer I can recollect from back in that time was Milecraft, and they had the rights to Disney for, I believe it was Kmart, maybe Walmart as well. So we were doing some of that stuff. I cut my teeth on a lot of screen printing, or at least being around it, of dye migration. At the time, they just used to call it bleeding, but I remember we printed some black cut parts for Milecraft that was Disney that bled like a stuck pig, and I remember it being this whole great big ordeal on how do we fix it. There was no manual press at ScreenTex. Like I said, being that it was all contract, we just at first had the 1 automatic, then 2 automatics. But we used to do what was called samples, or what some would call strike-offs. And it was this system by where we used to use the cut parts again. Remember, we wasn't t-shirts at this time. And we were able to use this table with the screen that had these pins, very similar to the pin system we had for the art department and the screen department. But it was where you used this clamp and this pin system, and we would line it up. And the clamp looked very similar to a clamp that we use on a manual press, but it wasn't on a rotary press. It was just on a table. And you literally could do one color or 20 colors, depending on how many screens you had in the design and how many bars or how many clamps you had that fit that particular table. And that was how we used to do strike-offs, to get them approved so that we could run production. If there's anything that I've talked about in this video, please don't hesitate to comment if you'd like me to elaborate a little bit more. I know I'm just breezing over a lot of different stuff, but if there's anything that sounds vaguely familiar or anything that you'd like to know more about, please leave a comment, let us know, and we'll make a follow-up video in the future going into further detail on whatever that particular subject is. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. Think about hanging around with me as I continue on in my screen printing journey. We also have a playlist titled My Journey, so you can find all of these videos in one place. Please give this video a thumbs up. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.